Welcome to Karma Chronicles. Please like the video and subscribe. Let's begin.
It was my cousin's graduation dinner, and the table was packed. My dad, his usual loud self, elbowing his way into conversations, my brothers bragging about their latest business deals, and my mom pretending not to notice the tension in the room. I barely picked up my plate, pushing the food around, my thoughts not really on the pasta in front of me, but on what my dad had just said. His voice rang out, clear and sharp, cutting through the chatter like a knife. "So what's next for you, huh?" he said, laughing as if he was joking. "Gonna be a big-time businesswoman? You know, one of those corporate types who spends all day in meetings and never actually gets anything done?" Everyone around the table chuckled, but I felt the words punch me in the gut. My internship at a top marketing firm, my first real step into the kind of career I wanted, meant nothing to him. It didn't matter that I was working hard, learning everything I could. To him, it was all just fluff. A joke. I didn't say anything. Didn't have to. My dad was used to dismissing me in front of everyone like this. If I opened my mouth, I'd either start crying or end up shouting something I'd regret. So I kept my mouth shut and kept my eyes on the half-eaten pasta. The silence after his words felt thick, like everyone knew exactly what had happened, but no one was willing to address it. Then, as quickly as the tension had arrived, the conversation shifted and everyone just kept talking, like nothing had happened. It stung, and I didn't know how to feel. A part of me wanted to fight back, but I knew that wasn't going to change anything. He wasn't going to be proud of me no matter what I did. I stayed quiet, but in that moment, something shifted. I realized that I was never going to earn his approval, not in a way that meant anything to him, and maybe, just maybe, I shouldn't care anymore. I didn't bring up my career much at family dinners after that night. It was easier not to. But the thing about my dad is, he always found a way to remind me that whatever I was doing wasn't really worth his time. Even when things were going well for me, his comments never failed to sting. I'd landed a position at a prestigious ad agency, and my colleagues were impressed with my work. They recognized me for what I was: dedicated, driven, skilled. And still, here I was, sitting around the dinner table again, enduring his condescending remarks. "So how's the big corporate world treating you, kid?" Dad asked, taking a sip from his beer, looking at me with that smirk that was supposed to be playful but always felt patronizing. "It's going well, actually," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I just wrapped up a big pitch for one of our major clients." He chuckled. "Oh, the meetings, right. You're the one who always arranges the client meetings, but you're never really the one in charge, are you?" His voice was loud, like he was making a joke for everyone at the table to laugh at. I didn't respond, didn't need to. I could feel my face flush, but I kept my gaze down, focusing on my plate. It was easier to ignore him than to argue. "Yeah," one of my brothers chimed in, his voice dripping with the same condescension. "I mean, she's got the connections, but I don't know if she's really doing the heavy lifting. Right, Dad?" "Exactly," Dad said, smiling like he had made some clever point. "You've got to be at the top to really count, you know? You can't just be the one pushing papers around." I wanted to say something back. I wanted to scream about how hard I worked, how much I'd sacrificed to get where I was. But I stayed silent because deep down, I knew it wouldn't make a difference. They didn't care. I looked around the table at my brothers who were too busy bragging about their own business ventures, and at my mom who wasn't even bothering to hide her exhaustion anymore. They didn't care about my career, not really. They never had. But something inside me clicked. I'd spent so many years chasing their approval, and all I got in return was dismissal. Maybe it was time to stop trying. Maybe it was time to prove myself on my own. I wasn't going to let their words define me. I didn't need their validation to succeed. That night, I stayed up late, going over strategies for a new project I'd been given at work. I was used to late nights by now. My colleagues didn't mind. They respected my drive, my ability to get things done. They didn't dismiss my work like my family did. I'd been with the agency for a year now, and I was making a name for myself. But I was still running on that quiet determination, a fuel no one but me seemed to understand. Every project, every client, every meeting was another step I took without needing anyone else's approval. It was hard, but I wasn't stopping. The next family dinner came, and my father didn't miss a chance to make another jab. "How's the job, kid? Still arranging all those meetings?" he asked, his voice tinged with amusement. I smiled thinly, nodded, and said nothing. It didn't matter. What mattered was that, in the silence of my own mind, I was already winning. The call came 2 weeks after I led the pitch meeting. It was my first real shot at something big. This was the kind of project that could make or break careers, and I was in charge. I had the lead role, organizing the strategy, managing the client relationship, pulling together the team. It was a huge deal. It meant I was being trusted with more responsibility, and that was exactly what I'd been working toward. The pressure was suffocating at first. I'd never been so terrified in my life, but somehow I managed to keep it together. I spoke with confidence, even when my stomach twisted into knots. I leaned on the people I trusted at the agency, and we pulled it off. The client signed, and it was mine, our win. But it felt like a personal triumph. I had to tell someone. So I picked up the phone and dialed my dad's number. I don't know what I expected. Maybe I thought this time would be different. Maybe I thought that this time he'd actually be proud. Hey, Dad. Just wanted to share some good news with you, I said, keeping my voice steady. I led the pitch for a new client. We closed the deal. It's a big win for the agency. There was a brief silence on the other end. I could hear him breathing, maybe shifting around in his chair. Then came the familiar tone that I'd come to dread. Yeah, sure, kid. That's great, he said, but his voice was flat. But it's just another deal, right? It's not like you actually ran the show. You just helped pull it all together. Just a part of the process. I felt a cold knot in my chest. The words hit harder than I expected, and for a second, I couldn't breathe. It's still a big win, I said, my voice faltering. The client's going to bring in a lot of business. It's a step forward, Dad, he sighed. I'm not saying it's nothing, but honestly, kid, you should focus on something a little more important. This isn't anything to get excited about. My heart sank. I thought maybe he'd at least be somewhat happy, but no, nothing had changed. All I'd done, all I'd worked for, and it was still nothing. He was still that guy, the guy who always saw me as just a small part of a bigger machine. All right, I said quietly. I'll talk to you later. I hung up without waiting for him to respond. The emptiness in my chest expanded, but I didn't have the energy to let it consume me. Not anymore. From that moment on, I stopped calling him with good news. What was the point? He wasn't going to be proud, not in the way I needed. I didn't need his approval anymore. It hurt like hell, but I had to move on. I threw myself into my work more than ever. The next few months felt like a blur of late nights and early mornings, meetings and deadlines. My team respected me. My colleagues valued my input. I didn't need my family to acknowledge what I was accomplishing. I was proving myself piece by piece. But the distance between my family and me grew. My wins felt hollow when I shared them with people who didn't care. They didn't get it. I didn't expect them to. What mattered was the work. And with every project, with every meeting, I was building something that had nothing to do with them. I wasn't going to wait for my dad to pat me on the back. I was going to make my own success, even if I had to do it without him. A few months later, I got the call I'd been waiting for. The promotion, the kind of role that told you you'd made it. I'd been working toward this for years, putting in the late nights, the constant grind, the projects that made me feel like I was swimming against the current. But this was the moment I'd earned. The offer came after I led a successful campaign that turned out to be one of the agency's biggest wins of the year. I'd spearheaded the entire project, from conceptualizing the strategy to overseeing the execution. The team was great, but I was the one who made it happen. The recognition was long overdue, and now I was stepping into a major leadership role. I felt on top of the world when I first got the news. But then, as always, there was that gnawing feeling I couldn't shake. The need to share it with my dad. Maybe this time, I thought, maybe this time he'll see me for what I've become. So, I called him. Hey, Dad, I said, trying to keep my voice calm, even though excitement was crawling under my skin. I've been promoted. I'm taking on a leadership role at the agency. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I could hear the muffled sound of him adjusting his position, the faint clinking of glassware in the background. Then he finally spoke, his voice as casual as always. Yeah, well, I guess that was expected, huh? With all your connections, it's not exactly a shocker. My heart dropped, but I kept it together. It's not just connections, Dad. It's about the work I've put in. It's deserved. Sure, he said, but still, don't get too excited. It's just one of those things that happens when you're in the right place at the right time. I felt the sting of those words cut deeper than they should have. Right place at the right time, I repeated, my voice barely a whisper. But I wasn't going to let myself get sucked into it. Not again. I'll talk to you later. I hung up before he could say anything more, and the silence that followed felt like it was suffocating me. I shouldn't have expected anything different. Deep down, I knew that he would never see the value in what I did. It was always going to be about what he thought I should have done, or who I should have been. His dismissiveness wasn't new, it was just louder now. That weekend, we had another family dinner. As usual, the conversation quickly turned to my brothers, who were talking about their latest ventures, new investments, new companies, new big moves. They had the kind of success that Dad could understand, tangible, quantifiable. They were playing the game he'd always wanted me to play, and they were winning. Meanwhile, I sat at the table, barely speaking. My accomplishments seemed so small in comparison to theirs in my father's eyes, so I stayed quiet. I picked at my food, listening to my father praise my brothers like they were the only ones worth noticing. You know, son, I'm really proud of you, Dad said to my older brother. You've got the kind of business sense that'll take you far. This new venture of yours, real smart. My younger brother nodded, looking smug. Yeah, it's the kind of thing that's going to put us ahead of the competition. And me? I was the afterthought. I overheard Dad mention something about how I'd always been good at getting things in order, but never really at the helm. That old line again. I closed my eyes and let it wash over me without reacting. I was done. I wasn't going to keep chasing after his approval. It was time to focus on what mattered. My career. I didn't need him to see my worth anymore. That night, as I lay in bed, I made a decision. I was going to lean into this role I'd earned, dive into the work without worrying about how my family saw it. There were real victories waiting for me. Not the kind that could be measured by my dad's approval, but the kind that would make me proud of who I was becoming. I had a team now, and they respected me. My input mattered. I had a chance to leave a mark, and for once, it didn't matter if he ever recognized it. The work was mine, the success was mine, and I was going to make sure the people who mattered saw it too. I'd been invited to speak at the industry's biggest event of the year. They were announcing the top rising stars in the marketing world, and I was on the list. I'd been nominated by my company, and the recognition was more than just a token. It was a sign that the hard work, the late nights, and the years of pushing myself had paid off. This was my moment, and nothing could take that away from me. The ceremony was buzzing with energy, the kind of atmosphere that made you feel like anything was possible. People were mingling in sharp suits, holding glasses of champagne, talking about their next big move. It was a room full of people who had made it, and I was about to join them. I'd put in the time, I'd earned this. But as the night wore on, I couldn't shake the thought of my dad. I hadn't told him I was being recognized because I knew it wouldn't matter to him. He'd probably find some way to belittle it, or at best, act like it was just another small victory. But the idea of him being there, even just for a moment, lingered. I wanted him to see me walk across that stage. I wanted him to finally understand. When they called my name, I stood up, my heart pounding in my chest. The room erupted in applause, and I made my way to the stage. I tried to stay calm, to keep my nerves under control, but it was impossible not to feel the weight of all the eyes on me. As I walked to the front, I saw him, my dad, sitting off to the side, arms crossed tightly across his chest, his face unreadable. He wasn't clapping. He wasn't even smiling. His eyes met mine for just a second, and I saw a flicker of discomfort, but nothing else. No pride. No recognition of the work I'd put in to get here. Just a man sitting in the crowd, watching his daughter do something she'd earned and not caring one bit. I felt a pang in my chest, but I kept my focus on the stage, forcing myself to smile as I accepted the award. The applause felt distant, like it was happening somewhere far away. It wasn't for him. It wasn't for the family who had never seen me. It wasn't for them. It was for me. I took the mic, made a few words of thanks, and got through the rest of the speech. I could feel my dad's eyes still on me, but I refused to look at him. This moment was for me. This was my victory, and it wasn't about his approval anymore. When I stepped down from the stage, the room was still buzzing, but I wasn't in the mood to celebrate. I could feel the weight of his gaze even from across the room. It didn't matter. Not anymore. I walked back to my seat, trying to push the feeling that had risen in me. Disappointment, maybe, or something darker. But then I remembered something I had told myself years ago. I didn't need him to validate me. This success was mine. The award was mine. His lack of approval wasn't going to change that. The loud conversations and laughter around me faded into the background. I took a deep breath and let it all sink in. I had made it. I was here. And no matter how much my dad would never see it, I knew the truth now. I didn't need him to define my worth. Not anymore. A few weeks after the ceremony, my dad's attitude toward my career hadn't changed. If anything, it had gotten worse. It didn't matter how much I'd accomplished or how far I'd come. To him, I was still that kid who hadn't figured it out. The small wins didn't impress him, and neither did my industry recognition. It was the family dinner that pushed me over the edge. My brothers were there, laughing about some new deal they had lined up, and my dad was holding court, telling stories about their latest ventures. It was always the same: praise, approval, admiration. Meanwhile, I sat quietly at the table, feeling the space between me and my family widening with each passing word. Then, my dad turned to me. "So, how's work?" he asked, like he cared. But I knew it was a setup for what was coming. "It's going well," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "I'm leading some major initiatives at the agency right now, and I've been working on some big campaigns." His eyes flickered over me like I wasn't saying anything of consequence. "Yeah, sure," he replied, his voice thick with sarcasm. "That sounds great, but it's not really that impressive, is it? I mean, you're just arranging the meetings, not really making the decisions." He laughed like it was a joke, but it wasn't funny anymore. "When are you going to get a real job?" I felt the heat rise in my face. It wasn't the first time he'd said something like that, but hearing it in front of my brothers, again, made it hit harder. They were both watching me now, waiting for my reaction. Their faces were neutral, but I could see the judgment in their eyes. "I am making decisions," I said, trying to steady myself. "I'm responsible for leading a team, managing the strategy, and delivering results. The success of the projects I lead impacts the entire agency." Right, he waved a hand dismissively. "But let's be real. Marketing's not the same as running a real business. You're just playing in the sandbox while we're out here making the big moves." I couldn't take it anymore. I felt every word slice through me like a blade. "That's not fair," I said, my voice tight. "You don't get it." "You never have." Dad shook his head, dismissing me with a shrug. "You'll figure it out eventually. Maybe when you actually get a job that matters." My brothers didn't say anything, but I could tell they were siding with him. They always did. The silence that followed felt suffocating. It wasn't just the dismissal of my career, it was the erasure of everything I'd worked for, everything I had become. "You're wrong," I said, barely recognizing my own voice. "I don't need your approval." "I don't need any of this," I gestured at the dinner table, at them, at this whole damn situation. "You're making a big deal out of nothing," my younger brother said, a little too casually, leaning back in his chair. "Just let it go. Dad's right." I felt my chest tighten. It wasn't just that he was siding with Dad, it was the way they both looked at me, like I didn't belong, like I wasn't part of their world. I stood up, suddenly too overwhelmed to stay seated. "I'm done," I said, my voice sharp as I grabbed my purse. "I'm done trying to get any of you to see me. I don't need you to validate me." Without waiting for anyone to respond, I turned and walked out. The sound of my brothers laughing at some joke I'd missed was the last thing I heard before I slammed the door behind me. The cool air hit me like a slap when I stepped outside, but it didn't bring any relief. I stood on the porch for a moment, breathing in, my heart pounding in my chest. I was done. Done with trying to make them see me. Done with trying to prove my worth to a family that would never understand. I didn't need them. I didn't need any of them to tell me what I'd achieved. I knew what I had done, and from now on, that was enough. The days after the dinner were quiet. I didn't reach out to my family, and they didn't reach out to me. The tension that had been building for years was now broken wide open, and I was left to pick up the pieces of a life I'd been trying so hard to fit into. But it was easier to focus on my career than anything else. After that night, I stopped looking back. I didn't need their approval to move forward. My work became my refuge, and it paid off. A few months later, I was promoted again. This time, I wasn't just managing a team, I was leading one. The new role came with even more responsibility, and this time, it felt different. The team I had was strong, ambitious, and most importantly, they respected me. They saw the value in my leadership and knew what I brought to the table. The work was harder, but it was rewarding in ways I never thought possible. The kind of fulfillment I'd been searching for wasn't going to come from my family, and I'd finally accepted that. I was building something real. I could feel the progress. Every project, every meeting, every win. And I wasn't doing it for anyone but myself anymore. There were people at the agency who actually valued my input, who acknowledged my hard work. My colleagues saw me as an equal. It was a stark contrast to what I'd experienced at home, but it was enough. It was more than enough. "Hey, great job on that last pitch," my new team member, Lena, said one afternoon, dropping into a chair beside me. "The client loved the direction you took. It's exactly what they needed." I smiled, feeling a genuine sense of pride. "Thanks, Lena. I'm glad they liked it." I think you're the best thing to happen to this department, she continued, and her sincerity made my chest swell. It's clear you've got the leadership we've been missing. Hearing that was like a weight lifting off my shoulders. It wasn't hollow praise, it was real recognition, and it meant everything. For the first time, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be, and it had nothing to do with my family's opinion. Despite everything, despite the emotional wreckage of the past, I was thriving. I was growing into the leader I'd always hoped I could be. I didn't need to explain myself to anyone anymore. I didn't need validation from people who couldn't understand what I was doing. I had people who respected me, who recognized my value, and I was finally learning to recognize it myself. I took a deep breath one morning, staring out the window of my office. The view wasn't the greatest, just a busy city street. But it didn't matter. What mattered was that this was mine. My career, my success, my achievements. I felt whole in a way I hadn't in a long time. It wasn't easy to let go of the idea that I'd always need my family's approval. But I had learned something over the past year. Approval was a gift you couldn't force. If they didn't get it, that was their problem, not mine. I had people who got it. People who saw me for who I was and not for who they wanted me to be. I was carving my own path now, and with every decision I made, every success I earned, I was building a future that was mine, entirely mine. No one else's expectations were going to shape it. It was my time. Finally, the gala was everything I'd imagined it would be. My agency had been hosting it for years, and this time, it was my turn to stand at the front of the room and accept the recognition. I'd earned it. I knew that without question. This was my moment. The award was for my contributions to the marketing industry, something that had taken years to build, one campaign at a time. The applause felt warm, deserved, as I walked up to the stage to accept the honor. I smiled, trying to steady my nerves. This wasn't just about the company or the project. This was about me, everything I had worked for. But just as I was about to step off the stage, I saw him. My dad. He wasn't supposed to be here. I hadn't told him about the gala. No point in doing so. But there he was, standing across the room with a glass of whiskey in his hand, talking to one of the board members. For a moment, I thought maybe it was just a coincidence. But then I realized he was here on purpose. His face, the way he carried himself, it was clear he had no intention of congratulating me. Instead, he stood there with his arms crossed, his expression tight. The same way he always looked at me when I failed to meet his expectations. I felt the familiar knot in my stomach, but I pushed it away. I wasn't here to focus on him. I was here to celebrate the work I'd done, the life I'd built. And for the first time, I didn't care what he thought. The night went on. I mingled with colleagues, accepting praise and congratulatory remarks from people who actually saw me, who knew what I was capable of. But every time I glanced in my dad's direction, I couldn't shake the feeling of his eyes on me. Finally, I had enough. I approached him, my steps firm, my mind made up. "Dad," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "I didn't know you'd be here." He looked at me, almost surprised, then glanced back at his drink, taking a sip before replying. "Yeah, well, I was invited. Seems like the big shots like to mingle with the people who can get things done, like them." I ignored the jab. "That's great. I'm glad you came." He shrugged. "I guess it's nice for you, getting all this attention for doing your part, but I still don't get it, kid. When are you going to actually lead something significant? You've been coasting on these small wins for too long. At some point, it's going to start feeling a little shallow, don't you think?" I froze for a second, the words landing like a punch to the gut, but I didn't let myself react. Not this time. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, but I stood tall. I wasn't the same person who had been desperate for his approval. I wasn't that scared girl anymore. "I don't need to explain myself to you anymore," I said, my voice low but clear. "I've done more than enough to prove what I'm capable of. If you can't see it, that's on you." His lips curled into a smirk, like he'd won some silent battle. "Whatever you say, kid. I'm just saying, don't expect the world to pat you on the back for what you're doing." I met his gaze, and in that moment, something inside me clicked. I didn't owe him anything. I didn't owe anyone anything. This wasn't about seeking approval anymore. It was about owning who I was, who I had become. "I'm not looking for validation from you, Dad," I said, a little louder this time. "I'm proud of what I've done, and I don't need you to tell me I'm worth it." He didn't respond. His silence said more than any words ever could. He wasn't going to change, and I realized then that I was done. Done hoping for something I'd never get from him. Done waiting for him to recognize me for who I really was. I turned and walked away, not looking back. The crowd buzzed with conversation, the clinking of glasses, the laughter of people who understood what it meant to be seen. But I wasn't looking for anyone else's approval either. I didn't need his validation. I didn't need anyone's, not anymore. I walked through the room, feeling the weight of that realization settle over me. I was enough. I'd always been enough. And the only person who needed to recognize that was me. A few months later, I got the letter. It was brief, just a few lines saying that my father had passed away quietly in his sleep. It was strange the way that news hit me. No tears, no anger, just a hollow emptiness that I couldn't quite explain. I attended the funeral, of course. There was no question about that. But when I walked into the church, the people there, the murmurs, the polite condolences, it all felt distant. My dad had been a figure in my life, yes, but now it felt like a chapter I was finally closing. I wasn't mourning the man I had lost. I was closing the door on a part of me that had been fighting to be seen, fighting for his recognition for too long. After the service, I stood outside for a long time, waiting as the crowd slowly thinned. Eventually, I found myself walking toward the graveyard, toward the spot where they had lowered his casket into the ground. I stood there, staring at the fresh mound of dirt. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't searching for answers. I wasn't wondering if he'd ever been proud of me, or if I'd ever lived up to the image of the daughter he wanted. I was just standing there. A small breeze brushed against my skin. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't some grand moment of revelation. But in that stillness, something shifted. I realized I had spent so much of my life trying to prove something to someone who would never see me for what I was. All those years, all the energy I'd put into earning his approval, it hadn't changed anything, and it didn't need to anymore. I reached into my bag and pulled out the award I'd received at the gala, the one I'd earned, the one he would never acknowledge. I held it in my hands for a moment, the cool metal weight in my fingers, and then I gently placed it on the ground by his gravestone. It wasn't for revenge. It wasn't to show him he'd been wrong. It was just a final acknowledgement of everything I had done on my own terms, without him, without needing his validation. I stood up, and for the first time, I felt at peace. I wasn't seeking anything from him anymore. My legacy wasn't about what he thought or what he would have wanted for me. It was mine. It had always been mine. I turned and walked away, feeling the weight of the past lift with every step. There was no need to look back anymore. I had written my own story.